CSS3 has three pseudo-classes that let you select elements that are the first child, last child, or only child of a parent element. The first child pseudo-class was defined in CSS2, but Internet Explorer 6 failed to support it, so few people ever used it. Internet Explorer 7 added support for first child, but the last child and only child pseudo-classes require a minimum of Internet Explorer 9. All other modern browsers support all three pseudo-classes. To clarify what these pseudo-classes affect, let's take a look at the HTML markup inside this page. Inside the main content div, the first child is this H2 living statues heading. The paragraph that follows is the first paragraph, but it's not the first child. The first child must be the first element nested inside the parent div. If you want to style the first paragraph, you need to use a different selector, which is the first of type selector. First child would only affect the H2 heading in this particular case. So to find the last child, I'll select the whole of the main content div, find the closing div tag, and the element which immediately precedes that, the final paragraph, is the last child of this div. And to be an only child, it means that there must be only one element inside the parent div. If there are any other elements, then the only child pseudo-class does not apply. Now that I've explained what these pseudo-classes affect, let's try to put them to some practical use. I'll just switch on Live View, and you can see that the Living Statues heading is below this heading in the sidebar. If I click the Inspect button to turn on CSS Inspect, I can see that the problem is being caused by a large margin on top of this heading. So if I create a rule which uses the first child pseudo-class, I can eliminate that heading without affecting this second H2 heading. So I'll open the style sheet. I'll create a new style rule here after the main content rule. So create the rule for main content, H2 colon first child, and set margin top to 0. And if we look at live view now, you can see that the margin has been eliminated and it's now in line with the other heading. But if I turn on CSS Inspect, you can see that the margin has gone there, but the margin has been maintained on the second H2 heading in that div. Right, let's try something for last child. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put a border at the bottom of the last paragraph in the sidebar, because that is the last child of the sidebar div. Just turn off CSS Inspect and Live View, and I'll insert my new rule here. So it'll be sidebar p colon last hyphen child, and I'll have border bottom. And I'll set that to 3 pixels solid black. And I'll also give it a little bit of padding at the bottom, 10 pixels. In live view. Now you see that it's put the border at the bottom of the sidebar, but it's also put a border at the bottom of the paragraph in the block quote, because it's also the last child within the block quote. If I don't want to have a border at the bottom there, I need to make a more specific style rule, and the way in which I'll do that is to turn this into a child selector. So I'll have a child selector selecting my last child pseudo class. Lots of children here, and just refresh that, and you can see that that has now gone. The border at the bottom of the block quote paragraph in the block quote has gone. You've probably guessed where I'm heading next, because this paragraph here is an only child. Let's just look at the source code. Here we are, the block quote. it has a single paragraph inside, so that's an only child. So what I can do now is to create a new style rule, which will be block quote, and then a descendant selector P only child. We give it a background color of a light grey, a border radius of 8 pixels and some padding. 10 pixels should be fine. And if I click in Design View, nothing seems to have happened. Well, the reason for that is because Design View doesn't support the only child pseudo class. If I turn on Live View, you can see that it has now been applied to the only child in my block quote. So there you have first child, last child, only child pseudo classes. They're not the most useful of pseudo classes, but they can be useful in certain situations. The problem with using the first, last and only child pseudo classes is that if you change the structure of your page, it then affects the position quite often where those first and last child or only child pseudo classes are applied.